couldn't agree with you more about that being the ultimate problem of mankind, not necessarily a terrorist type usage of, but a state-sponsored usage of weapons of mass destruction. And it will happen someday. The extent to which it will happen, where it will happen, who knows? But we have always had evil people. We've always had people who wish evil on others. And, thousands of years ago, if you were psychotic or a religious fanatic or a malcontent and you wished evil on your neighbor, you picked up a rock and threw it at him, and that was about the damage you could do. But we went on to bows and arrows and cannons and a few things. But since 1945, it's the potential for inflicting enormous harm on incredible numbers of people has increased, at a geometric pace. So it is the problem of mankind. It may happen here, it may happen someplace else. People say sometimes they say, well, if we solve poverty, we'd solve this. Well, I would just remind you that nuclear weapons have only been used twice, and those were by the richest country in the world, the United States, in 1945. So people will justify their use under some circumstances if they feel threatened. They will justify them for religious reasons. They will do all kinds of crazy things. And what holds it in check is the degree to which the lack of knowledge of how to do it is controlled, and the degree to which the materials are controlled, and which the deliverability is circumscribed. And we're losing ground on all of those fronts. The knowledge is more widespread. The possibility of getting your hands on materials, the Dr. Kahns of the world and so on, has increased, and it will be it's a real problem. But we won't be thinking about what Berkshire did that day in the stock market. And I don't know. I don't know how money attacks that. I mean, I've always held that as the top priority. I think should be the top priority for a philanthropy in my particular case. But it's a very difficult. It's a worst case problem. You have 6 billion people in the world, and if a certain percentage of them who are one way or another a little crazy or very crazy, and some of whom, and that craziness would manifest itself by trying to do great harm to a lot of people. And it's only one of them has to succeed. I don't know how many we've intercepted over the years. I'm sure we've intercepted a lot of incipient ones, but it is a worst case problem, and one will succeed at some point. And it may be state sponsored, it may be terrorists. But Berkshire is better set to survive than anybody else, but it won't make much difference. Charlie?
Well, I think that the chances we'll have another 60 or 70 years with no nuclear devices used on purpose is pretty close to zero. So I think you're right to worry about it, but I don't myself think there's much that any of us can do about it except to be as sensible as we can and take the consequences as they come.
The only thing you can do about it, but you only have one vote, is to elect leaders who are terribly conscious of the product and problem, and who devote a significant part of their thought and energy into minimizing it. You can't eliminate it. The genie is out of the bottle, and you would like to have the leaders of the major countries of the world regarding it as a primary focus. Actually, in the 2004 campaign, I think that both candidates said it was the major problem of our time, but they probably suffer from the same feeling that I do, that it's very hard to address.
Well, it's the great problem of mankind, along with proliferation or the spread of other weapons of mass destruction in the chemical and biological field. The genie is out of the bottle on nuclear knowledge, and more and more people are going to know how to do enormous damage to the rest of the human race as the years go by. You'll have a given percentage of the population that are psychotics or megalomaniacs or religious fanatics or whatever, and will wish ill on their neighbors. And the choke point will be, presumably, will be materials and to a degree deliverability. I think people generally associate weapons of mass destruction threats these days with terrorists and rogue organizations of some sort, and not so much with nations. But I regard both as being enormous threats to the future of mankind, and we have not made much progress in that respect. We should be doing everything possible to reduce access to materials, and I've even had a few thoughts on that, which you can look up on the Nuclear Threat Initiative, probably on the website. And we've got a proposal actually that might reduce by a tiny bit the rationale, at least, for all kinds of nations having highly enriched uranium and that sort of thing. But it is the primary problem of mankind. If you've got 6.5 billion people, you're probably going to have, in the world, you're probably going to have close to twice the number of people who wish ill on their neighbor than you had when you had 3 billion people. And for a long time, if you were a psychotic or something, you could pick up a stone and throw it at the guy in the next cave, and you moved on to bows and arrows and rifles and cannon. But for millennia, the ability to inflict massive damage was quite limited, no matter how crazy you were. And since 1945, when Einstein said that the atomic bomb, as they called it then, has changed everything in the world except how men think. That was a comment made shortly after Hiroshima. We live in a world where exponentially has experienced exponential growth in the ability to inflict harm on somebody else, and we haven't gotten rid of the nuts or the people who want to do it. And it is, whether it's Iran or you name it, or whether it's terrorist organizations or whatever, we live in a very, very, very dangerous world on that is getting more dangerous as we go along. And we've been very lucky since 1945. When the Cuban Missile Crisis came along in the 60s, it might have been 50-50. And I think we were lucky we were dealing with Khrushchev, and we were lucky that Kennedy behaved the way he did. But we were lucky. And Charlie and I talked a lot about it in the 60s at the time. But it won't go away. And you would hope, at least in the United States, that we have an administration, whether it's Republican or Democrat, where that's at the top of the agenda, trying to figure out a way to minimize that risk. You can't eliminate it. It is out of the bottle, but we've got to. It should be paramount to minimize the risk that we really get into something that involves, deaths on a scale that nobody's ever contemplated before. Charlie?
Yeah, well, you talk about deaths on a scale that people have never contemplated before. People have recently figured out that the population of Mexico probably had a population decline of 95% caused by European man bringing in his pathogens. And it was a pretty big civilization that went through that little knothole. These things can happen and have happened, and look at Mexico today. I don't think it's going to wipe out the species.
Well, that's the good
I hope
news.
that cheers you up.
The cockroaches will survive. It's a very good question. I wish I knew a better answer. Well, the answer is the world is flipping a coin every day as to whether people who can literally destroy the planet as we know it, will do it. And unfortunately, the major problem is with people that have large stocks of nuclear weapons.
I know a man who said, I know what I'm going to do if there's a nuclear war. I'm going to crawl under the table and kiss my ass goodbye.